I care about animals. You probably care about animals. You're probably a vegan. That's a lot of caring about animals, even if your motivation is your arteries or something else. But you know what? I love talking with people who have so dedicated themselves to the animals that it's really what they're doing with, as the poet said, this one wild and precious life. We're going to be meeting somebody like that today. And you know what? I think that you are going to admire him as much as I do. Hi, everybody. I'm Victoria Moran, and this is the Main Street Vegan Podcast. Oh my gosh, I've been saying that for such a long time. We have been doing this just about every single week for 13 years. And I guess as we enter into a new year next month, it is soon to be 14. And there are just so many great people out there with wonderful stories and wonderful passions that can give us all of this enthusiasm and excitement every single Thursday. And thank you so much for being part of that. Now, if you are new to the Main Street Vegan family, I do invite you to look at mainstreetvegan.com, where you will not only find our show notes for this episode and how to reach and find out more about our wonderful guests from today, but you'll also learn about all the things that happen beneath the Main Street Vegan umbrella, one of which is Main Street Vegan Academy, training and certifying vegan lifestyle coaches and educators. Oh, it's so much fun. We're on Zoom, we're live. You meet the instructors, you talk to people, you ask questions, you get all sorts of follow-up afterwards. And guess what we're doing this year? In addition to our regular Zoom course, graduates and people who come for the 2026 cohort will get to come to New York City for an NYC experience and meet all sorts of remarkable experts, instructors, and wonderful folks. So do take a look at mainstreetvegan.com and find out about it. Now, we did one of those New York City experiences a couple of years ago, and one of the wonderful, wonderful people who made it as wonderful as it was is my guest for today. He is Donnie Moss. He has been at this animal rights passion crusade for a really long time. We're going to be talking about something that he did almost 20 years ago and where that has gone now. But what he's doing right now, this minute, just about 2026, is moving from his online magazine and activism platform, Their Turn, to Veg Media Watch, which is looking at media coverage around animals and animal rights, traditional, a little bit social too, and saying hooray, hooray, hooray when the media tells the truth and says something that ought to be said about what's going on for animals, and boo hiss when it does not. It seems like we're kind of in a boo hiss period right now. So, Donnie Moss, what would you say? Is it booing and hissing out there?
Yeah, Victoria, it's sort of a dark time in our movement if we're going to be honest about what's happening. I mean, do you remember all of the excitement in like 2017 and 18 when the plant-based meats were coming out and they were almost indistinguishable from, from actual cow hamburgers. And there was just a lot of excitement, enthusiasm, and people were liking those products, and the meat industry began to panic. And at one point, Victoria, I don't know if you remember this, the stock price of Beyond Meat shot up to $250, and now it's down to about $1 or $2. And that demonstrates the power of the beef and dairy industries. It's not because people don't like those products any more than they did back then. It's because the beef and dairy industries have engaged in so much propaganda that people are now afraid to consume them. And of course, one of the buzzwords we're hearing now and we're seeing all over our social media feeds is ultra processed. And these industries have been able to use social media and the mainstream media where they pay for advertisements to spread this propaganda. And so Veg Media Watch is an endeavor I started several months ago to hold the mainstream media accountable for publishing and posting anti-vegan propaganda, to combat it, and also to amplify pro-vegan fair reporting that we're seeing in the mainstream media. But the caveat here is that Veg Media Watch, which is very much needed right now, only focuses on the mainstream media. There's an enormous problem with social media too, where anybody who's paying any attention at all sees the barrage of posts, these quote influencers who are being paid by the meat and dairy industries to marginalize and vilify veganism and plant-based foods.
Well, that's a lot to unpack. And I've noticed it too, what's going on now with our movement. In fact, I wrote a blog post at mainstreetvegan.com just about a week and a half ago that was called Elvis, no, it was Veganism 2025, Elvis 1964. And it was that in 1964, and I know this because I'm old and I remember, the Beatles happened. And the next day, everybody else was just, but Elvis sold several 100 million albums after the Beatles. After, the King is dead and Elvis is gone, he still made more impact than he ever did before after the big popularity thing passed. So the whole idea is, yeah, we're in an unpopular time right now. Doesn't mean we'll stay there. And we can do a lot even from here. And another thing I think is that around the world, and in fact, Peter Singer, for those of you who aren't familiar, Peter Singer is a philosopher who actually coined the term animal rights in his book Animal Liberation in 1975. Anyway, he had said, it's mostly in the US where all these terrible things are going on, and we're still making good progress otherwise. So that's kind of positive. But we have to do something here. So thank goodness we have Veg Media Watch to do that. So let's focus first on the traditional media. And I know from coming from that world professionally myself, I was in magazines for many years, that when it looks like something is popular and trending and happening, and oh my gosh, everybody is eating this food or everybody is wearing, this color lipstick, it's because some company paid a PR firm to blanket all of the media outlets with that particular piece of information. And so you're telling us that that's really what the meat and dairy industries are doing now with wild abandon.
Absolutely. There's the National Cattlemen's Beef Association launched a few years ago a Masters and Beef Advocacy, an MBA. And as of 2023, it has 21,000 graduates. This is, there's a story in The Guardian that, in 2003, The Guardian sort of broke this story and sort of informed the public about what was going on. But this is a free program. And if you go through the program and get your certificate, as if that's anything in the real world, you'll be paid $17 an hour to go online and deliver the infographics and the message points delivered to you by the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And so you've got all of these, thousands of people who are taking to the internet now. And again, this is more on the social media side, not the mainstream media side, who are going going online and parroting these anti-vegan, pro-meat message points. In fact, just a few days ago, someone took to Reddit. They asked me anything, program in Reddit, and said, I was paid to discredit veganism online. Ask me anything. And this person goes on to say, for a year, I worked for a meat industry trade group. I won't say which one, but they are US based. My job was to go onto sites like this and discredit veganism. We'd make multiple accounts and pretend to be vegans who had bad health outcomes, or we'd pretend to be vegans and we'd push the vegan subs to be more extreme and therefore easier to discredit. It was pretty gross. I knew it. I did it anyway. and he goes on, this person goes on to say what they did. And so that's what we're up against. That's a lot. We don't have the funding of the meat and dairy industry, but what we have is a passion that these people who are being paid $17 an hour don't have. They were there for a few bucks. We live and breathe this stuff. It's running through our veins. Which this is what we think about when we go to bed at night. you know you talked about Peter Singer coining the term animal rights. Just today I was reading about ACT UP, the AIDS organization that came into existence in 2000, I'm sorry, in the early 1980s, when tens of thousands of gay men were dying of this mysterious disease, and the government was paying no attention at all because the victims were gay. And at that time, who cared about gay people? They had it coming to them, and it was a horrible and dark time. And these young men were literally fighting for their lives. And the phrase that they wore in their T-shirts when they took to the streets and engaged in civil disobedience was "silence equals death." And I feel like that phrase is so sort of appropriate here, because our silence, if we don't speak up, our silence could lead to not only to the death of our movement, to the deaths of thousands of animals who, it doesn't have to be that way. If we use our voices, if we use our passion, if we use our bodies, we can fight this. It's just that we all have to be in this together, and use the skills that we have to combat this propaganda, this campaign against veganism.
Well, it is interesting, and it may be the trajectory of all liberation movements. I'm not really a student of them other than ours, but there was a time that the mainstream media didn't cause us any problems because they didn't care. There were so few of us, and there was just nothing to write about. And so we have made some progress to get to the point where the meat and dairy industries are running scared, at least a little bit. But what do we do? Is there background for this? Did the gay rights movement go through this? Do you know about other movements? Is this just a natural period?
Well, I mean, I think that each movement has to, customize its objectives, strategies, and tactics based on, the sort of current state of affairs. In our case, our movement, this is happening at a time where everybody lives their lives online, and social media has, unfortunately taken over most of our lives. And so a couple days ago, I heard somebody referring to the need for vegans to get into the verticals. And what I think that refers to are, when you're scrolling all of these reels, and we see the opposition getting into the verticals, but we're not seeing us getting into them nearly enough, because we are, with a lot of our work, we're preaching to the converted, or our messages simply aren't, about slaughter and factory farming, and people tune it out. They don't want to see it, and so they're not being fed our info and their algorithms. So we have to figure out how to create content that will get into those algorithms. And one of those things is focusing on lifestyle. That's what people care about: what they eat and what they wear and how they exercise and take care of themselves. And so if that's where we have to meet people, so be it. But I would say what I'm doing with Veg Media Watch is a bit different from that. I'm actually holding individual reporters and media outlets accountable when it's clear to me that their coverage is biased or a form of propaganda, where there's no fair balance, where it feels like they are parroting industry talking points without giving the other side of the story. And I saw that recently in the Wall Street Journal, where they platform a writer who passes herself off to be an expert in nutrition, but really is somebody who is paid by the meat and dairy industries to bash meat. And so this person's not doing it
You
on
mean
social media.
to say good things about meat,
I'm
to
sorry,
bash
to say
vegans?
good things about meat, exactly, and to
Yeah,
bash plant-based products.
right.
All from a health perspective, you will be unhealthy if you follow a plant-based diet. Why is the Wall Street Journal giving this person a platform to spread this propaganda without even acknowledging this person's conflicts of interest? That shouldn't be on the op-ed pages without some sort of disclosure. So I'll call that out. And our one of the leaders in our movement, Jane Velez Mitchell of Unchained TV,
Mhm.
used to be a mainstream media reporter, and she's the one who said that reporters care about being called out as biased or unfair. It really has an impact on them. So it makes sense in the mainstream media, not necessarily the social media, but in the mainstream media, to call these reporters out, to tag them, to tag their editors, to tag decision makers at those mainstream media outlets. And despite the fact that Veg Media Watch has a very small following because it's still new, and quite frankly, it's not as exciting as a lot of the stuff that you see online, the more fun vegan videos. But despite that fact, I've had reporters reply to me, some defensively, some to acknowledge that what I've said makes sense, some to thank me for amplifying their fair stories. So I know that this has the power to make a difference, but like anything else, this is a spoke in the wheel. We all have to jump in here because we're fighting for vegan lives here, for the life of the vegan movement.
Yes. It's all very complex because veganism has tentacles. Well, I think you and I came to it for the animals, and back in the day when people would come to it, they all got interested in their health as well because we had to be as healthy as we could be so that we wouldn't get legitimate criticism because there was a time when doing this was very new. We didn't have all of these wonderful medical studies and reports that this way of eating is not only safe but can actually reverse certain kinds of pathologies. None of that was there, and so we all paid attention to our health, and I think we all kind of liked nature even before we knew that there was an environmental crisis. But now we know all this stuff, and now there's just so much to piece together. Yesterday, I was walking out of my building, commented to this woman that I liked her clothes, and blah, blah, what do you do? I do vegan stuff. Oh, I was a vegan for 30 years. I actually went vegan when I was 13 years old. But then, I don't know, I just couldn't gain any weight. And it's like, give me a break. Line up after the person who couldn't lose any weight, and after the other person who felt weak, and the other person who felt tired, and the other person whose stomach hurt. This is life. And things like weight and stomach issues, they happen to humans, whether you're vegan or whether you're carnivore or something in between. And this whole idea that my life was not absolutely perfect.
Mm.
And so I stopped being vegan. And you kind of want to say, well, is your life perfect now? And they'd probably say yes, just to justify their decision. So, how do you see that how we can reach the media, and we'll move on to social media in a minute, but how can we communicate with the communicators when this topic that could be so simple has become so complicated?
How do we communicate with the communicators? I mean, if by communicators you mean the mainstream media, I mean they give us a forum to communicate with them. We have the opportunity to submit letters to the editor, which I do periodically. We have the opportunity to comment on their articles, and you'll see on the New York Times website, reporters will engage with people who are posting comments. They clearly care about what their readers are saying. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we care about this stuff, in our hearts. It's so visceral to us, and much more so than the people on the other side who might be paying a few bucks to marginalize and vilify us. So we just have to keep using our voices, uh, to spread the truth. I mean, you talk about the woman who you met in your building who said, I couldn't gain weight. I mean, these are sort of defense mechanisms that people engage in to justify their behavior. And I guess what I've learned over the years, Victoria, is that people are selfish. I mean, I think we love animals. I think everyone loves animals and will say that they love animals, but not enough to make personal sacrifices in most cases, which is why there are so few of us. And so how do we get to these people? How do we reach them? We live our best lives. We demonstrate through our own actions and through our own lives that this is a good way to live for our minds and our bodies and our souls. We model good behavior. And as Gene Bauer, who founded the Farm Sanctuary, always says, we have to meet people where they are. Years ago, and fellow animal rights activists said, baby steps are for babies. And I thought, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But at the same time, in other words, everyone should go vegan all overnight because taking baby steps toward veganism, um, it's just not enough. Animals are dying right now in slaughterhouses and they're being, mutilated in factory farms. Baby steps aren't enough. But unfortunately, we do have to meet people where they are and bring them along in whatever ways we think we can impact people, whether it's through their health, whether it's through the planet, or whether it's through for ethical reasons. I think you and I came to this because of the ethics. And that message does speak to some people, but not to many others. Victoria, I remember so vividly in 2005 when I got my hands on a Meet Your Meat DVD. This was when we put DVDs in our computers. And I watched this. I wasn't vegan, but I stumbled upon a veg fest in my neighborhood. And I went in and I had some free samples and I took this DVD home called Meet Your Meat, a video narrated by Alec Baldwin that takes viewers behind this, into factory farms and slaughterhouses. I had never seen this footage before, but I had always described myself as an animal lover, despite the fact that I sat down to eat them 3 times a day. I put this video in, I watched, I closed my laptop and I said, I'm going vegan, and I went vegan right then and there was no sort of transition period for me, which I think is unusual. And later on, I realized that some people are just wired this way. This was running through my veins before I even realized it. It's so sort of central to who I am. I live it and breathe it every day. And I think you do too. And I think people like us, the burden is on us to do whatever we can to help people move in the right direction. But on the health front, it was just within the few days after going vegan, I was jogging in the park and I had this weird sensation like I was floating above the pavement. And I couldn't figure out what that was about. And it happened day after day. And I finally connected the dots between that sensation and making the switch to plant-based foods. And I don't think this was psychosomatic. I think this was real. I guess, when you're eating a high fiber diet and the food is moving through you and all that meat and all that gunk isn't getting stuck in your intestines, you feel lighter. And I think that's what was happening. I felt like I was like levitating. And I thought, wait a minute, there are health benefits to this thing too. I was 32 at the time. I was thin. I wasn't really thin. I was healthy. When you're younger, you can get away with all, eating a lot of garbage and doing things to your body that we can't do now that we're older. And I hadn't even thought about the health implications of making the switch to a plant-based diet. It didn't enter my mind until I had this sensation. And then I thought, wait a minute, there are benefits to me here too. I'm not just helping the animals, I'm helping myself, physically, and then of course, mentally, spiritually.
And why everybody doesn't get that or why everybody doesn't keep that is it's just the $64 question. But what is happening now, if that had happened to you 2 weeks ago, you might be feeling it, and then you'd open up your social media and somebody would try to convince you that you're not. Oh my gosh, you're lightheaded. You don't have enough iron or whatever it is that they're saying. And I know, I mean, sometimes, Donnie, I feel like if I wasn't in this work, I would so not do social media at all.
Me
Because
too.
I'm not of that generation. It doesn't make me happy. I'm not good at making videos, but I feel I have to be there for the animals. And yet it's just sometimes so frustrating. There was something the other day. There was this woman. who supposedly lived in a small village in the Amazon. The only thing was, she spoke English with no accent. So tell me how many people in the Amazon do that? And she was talking about things she eats, and then she got to bone broth, which to me is the most awful phrase. It reminds me of that fairy tale, Jack and the Beanstalk, where the giant grounds somebody's bones to make his bread. It's just like, ooh, bone broth, ooh, nasty. But I made a comment and somebody came back to me and said, "What is wrong with you? Bone broth is fabulous." And it's like, I live in a world where people think that drinking marinated bones is positive. So, okay, throwing it at you, social media.
Yeah.
What do we do?
Yeah. You know what what you just said reminds me that we can't take anything for granted. There was a time in the, 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19. I don't remember exactly the years, but we felt like we were on top of the world. We were really making a dent. You heard about, the cities were fighting with each other to be designated as the vegan capital. There was sort of so much pride in this. There was so much excitement among the mainstream public about making this switch to veganism. And then, then the word plant-based, and vegan, things that were sort of on the margins sort of became more mainstream. There was a time when I first went vegan where there were just only a few vegan restaurants. I mean, of course now there are a dime a dozen, but at the time, people thought we ate, grass and hay or whatever they thought, and trees. Um, and then we were making all of this progress, and it felt like we were on a trajectory and that there was no turning back. Well, now it does feel like we're turning back. And we have to roll up our sleeves and fight and not take anything. We can't take anything for granted because we saw what happened between 2019 and, let's say, when the meat industry started to fight us, and now where we're not in the same good place that we were back then. So what do we do? I mean, I think that the vegan world is coming together now, sort of organically. I was on a Zoom the other day with vegan creator content, VCC. They are helping vegans create content that is going to penetrate the quote, what I mentioned earlier, the verticals, get into the feeds of people who are now only seeing or largely seeing this pro-meat, anti-vegan content. So there is money being invested by donors, and there are influencers who know how to do this stuff, know how to make the short videos that are compelling and that will reach people who are looking at lifestyle videos, what they eat and what they wear and how they exercise. And so there is an effort to fight back. Again, what I'm doing is just a small spoke in the wheel. There are all of these other things that are happening. And as I said, we all need to use our platforms, to use our voices, to speak the truth, to combat this propaganda.
Well, one of the things you talked about is ultra processed. And I was on the Holistic Holiday at Sea cruise in September with Dr. Michael Greger, and he gave the most interesting presentation about processed foods and ultra processed foods. And he said, and he had, of course, also wonderful documentation. I mean, he can't say good morning without documenting it, that the exception to the rule where the packaged food in 95% of the cases is less nutritious than the fresh food is when you're looking at the faux meats versus animal meat. They really do have no cholesterol, far less saturated fat, fiber, which meat doesn't have, and all these great things. And yet, facts don't go very far on social media.
No, it's hard to combat that ultra processed propaganda. It really is. I mean, when you when you think about it, there's a double standard here because forever all of these people who are online shouting about ultra processed vegan food what are they? Are they sitting around eating broccoli florets all day long? They're eating bread, bread that comes out of a package and pasta and chips and crackers and cookies. They're eating processed foods all day long. But suddenly there are vegan foods that are processed, and we know that they're healthier than the animal alternatives. But even if they weren't, why are we being held to this double standard? You know,
Eh.
it's just not right. Yeah, I mean, look, in an ideal world, all of us would be eating whole plant-based foods for all of our meals, but that's not reality for pretty much anybody. We're all eating, to some extent, processed foods, and the idea that vegan, plant-based processed foods are somehow more unhealthy than non-vegan processed foods is preposterous because, as you said, at least our plant-based burgers are made with avocado oil and soy and pea protein, not and aren't filled with hormones and antibiotics and pesticides and cholesterol and all of this saturated fat, all of the other horrible things that you get in a beef burger, which is very much processed itself.
Mhm.
And no, I don't think people realize that. People make the assumption that a hamburger made from cows is somehow not a processed food. But of course it is. All of those, and in fact, the World Health Organization designated processed meats, which would be
Mhm.
bacon and salami and turkey that you'd get in a deli, as a class one carcinogen. That makes it so much more dangerous and so much more unhealthy than a Beyond Burger. You know,
Mm.
it's our job to tell that story. We don't have the resources of big meat and dairy, but we've got the passion and we've got some support, and we just have to we have to put one foot in front of the other. We have no
Yeah.
choice.
Well, let's talk about the vertical because I get tons of vegan content, I guess because that's where I go and the way it works is you see what you want to see.
The algorithm.
Exactly. But what we want is somebody who hasn't been vegan for 42 years to be seeing it.
Yeah.
So, what can we do with our own feeds and our own posts to help with this?
Well, as I said, there are people now who are specializing in creating lifestyle content that more subtly promotes a vegan lifestyle and plant-based diet. So we're meeting people where not the people who are already converted or not the people who are completely shut off to this. We're meeting just regular people whose algorithms are filled with stories about eating and health and fitness and fashion and makeup,
Mm.
and we're getting content into those feeds. It's a more subtle way of introducing people, living our best lives,
Yeah.
and presenting veganism in this uplifting and positive way. Whereas, I when I started this, I was influenced by videos of slaughterhouses and factory farms, and that's what did it for me. But and I thought that would be enough for everybody else. I so vividly remember, Victoria, taking that DVD, which showed all of this horrible stuff, to my friends' houses and putting it in their DVD players and thinking that everyone was going to have the same reaction
Mhm.
as I did. And virtually nobody had that reaction. And so I realized I'm going to have to tailor my approach here for the animals, and of course now for the planet. And of course, because I care about my friends' health, but
Mhm.
for all of those reasons. And so, yeah, you and I aren't necessarily going to produce this content that's going to get into those verticals, but other people are doing it, and we can amplify that content. We can share that content, comment on it, like it, and that's a way we can contribute. Or we could try to figure out how to do it on our own. I'm so
Well,
accustomed. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say you were really inspiring me because I've tried it so many different ways in my life. And, mostly I've written books. That's been where I've put my energy. And I hate to see books having less emphasis than they once did, but I still think they're important. And many of them have just been about lifestyle. And every time I've done one of those, even though the vegan current has always been there, I've always felt like, no, you need to be more out there, with the animals. And yet, when you write a book or do anything that says vegan, You attract vegans. I mean, I learned that about this podcast. I guess I was so naive, but we started this back in 2012, and I was at the UK Veg Fest in I think 2014. So the podcast had been around for 2 years, and people were coming up to me and saying, "Oh, we listened to your podcast in Portugal. We listened to your podcast in Lithuania." And it's like, but you're already vegan. Like, this podcast isn't for you. It's called Main Street Vegan. That's to get those people on Main Street and bring them over here. But it was very clear that because it said vegan, the vegans were coming first. And I've had some, obviously, some other people, people who have found it and found veganism that way, which is wonderful. But it's very interesting what you're saying about focus on the lifestyle and what you can do for people. And even if you're seldom mentioning the animals directly, if it gets people to use and abuse fewer animals, it's doing the thing.
If we're reaching them, if we're reaching people through their stomachs or through their vanity or, however we need to get there. Recently, if you go to my personal Facebook page, I've been posting photos of, beautifully presented vegan foods in restaurants.
Ah,
Not really talking about the animals, which is where my heart is, and which
yes,
is
of
why I'm
course.
posting these photos. But
Yeah.
just look at this scrumptious food. It's so colorful and so delicious and so different and so exciting for the taste buds. And you need to try this, and here's where to go. And I've had so many people say to me through, direct messages or posting comments, I went to that restaurant and tried it, or I just made a reservation. Looks amazing. And I feel like I'm making more of an impact that way than I did posting videos, of when I went into a factory farm at night and
Hmm.
exposed, what was going on inside. I mean, I've done that too, but this might be a better way. Look, again, I'll always say this: there's spokes in a wheel. We need to be doing all of this stuff. But what we're learning more recently is what's reaching the mainstream isn't the stuff we've been doing for years. It's the more subtle stuff that is that is reaching people who are interested in improving their own lives through their health and their diet and their beauty and all of that stuff.
Yeah. Wow, that is making a lot of sense. And what do you think about the word vegan? I notice you're calling yours veg media, which is close.
Well, good question. I did that mostly because Veg Media Watch is already a pretty long hashtag
Hmm.
and, at Veg Media Watch. So at Vegan Media Watch would be even longer. I guess Veg Media Watch, maybe I didn't give it a ton of thought, which is odd since I, have a website called vegmediawatch.org. You think I would have given this a ton of thought? It just works well, I think.
It does work well.
It
It
has a good
works
ring
really
to it.
well.
Yeah, Vegan Media Watch just doesn't have the same ring to it. But
Yeah.
that's all that was about. But Victoria, I just want to add one more thing.
Yes.
What should we do? It makes me think that you and I, who have been around a lot longer and are older than, kids in their 20s who, who are live on social media and know how to use it more probably effectively than you and I, maybe we need to step out of our comfort zones and, try to maybe appeal to our own demographic in a, and get into the quote verticals. And I still need to sort of fully figure out what that even means, but in a different way than we've been doing it. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
just a
Oh,
thought.
that is very inspiring. Loving it. And I hope everybody listening, I hope this is inspiring you. And maybe if you don't belong to the Facebook group, the Main Street Vegan podcast listeners group, please join us there. Leave some comments. Let's talk about this episode and what we can all do. Now, we're talking about getting the word out on every level of what this way of life is about. And that's also going to mean bringing together different facets of our own movement. And when I was on the cruise, it was very educational for me because I met so many people, wonderful people, who totally do the food for their health and learned about the animals since. Many of them have stopped doing leather shoes and, all that sort of thing. Because, once you're no longer eating the food, it's much easier to look at the other issues because it's no longer feeling like, you're being attacked or something. And so I'm just wondering how we can bring our own, we talked about the tentacles earlier, how we can bring them together. Because sometimes I feel like there's a big difference. Somebody was saying to me yesterday that, they had felt hurt at times by health shaming and some of the stuff they're getting from the health people. And I know a lot of the health people just look sort of dumbfounded at why would anybody want to go to all the trouble to stop eating animal products, but still want to have fried foods and, sweets and all these kinds of things that are going to damage their health? It's like, why? And it's like, well, people are going to be on a spectrum. Not everybody is going to want to do everything exactly the same way, but how can we be who we are and have our own lives that we choose, but still come together on this thing that we agree about so much, which is not consuming dead animals and their products?
I mean, if I had the answer to that question, I'd be so rich that I wouldn't be here on this podcast with you. I
Mhm.
mean, really, how do we bring people together? One thing I've learned, I'm a gay man. I've seen that social justice movement. I think we all lived through the height of the Black Lives Matter movement. Social justice work is not easy because you've got people coming from all of these different points of view. Some people believe in intersectionalism. Some people want to focus on the issue at hand and not muddy the waters with other issues. This is hard stuff. I find that what's worked for me as an activist is, I've got a core group of activists in New York City with whom I've worked on grassroots campaigns for years and years and years, and and our energy works together, and we've been able to get stuff done together. But these are discrete campaigns. I'm not talking about making the whole world vegan. These were specific efforts to combat a specific injustice, and then win that victory and move on to something else. Um, you know, I guess, Victoria, we just need to be true to ourselves and find a way to work with those who work with our colleagues in the movement and do the best we can. I don't have the answer to that question as to how we can unite an entire movement. It's like every other social justice movement, there is a lot of strife in our movement. It's not unique to us. We're no better or worse than anybody else. This is par for the course. If someone can figure it out, um, I would be most appreciative. And similarly, if someone could figure out what the sort of how we break through to the mainstream, if there was one sort of solution to how we could break through the mainstream, I mean, we would be in much better shape than we are now. This is just hard work.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
we just have to continue to be true to ourselves, but also adapt with the changing times, which I think you and I are realizing things have changed.
yeah.
And
Rapidly.
yeah, and to be effective, we're going to have to adapt.
Right, right. Well, as we're kind of winding down here, Donnie, I do want to talk about one specific campaign that you've been involved with for a very, very long time. You made one of the, I would say, early animal rights documentaries, your film Blinders, about the carriage horses in New York City. Now, people have been fighting that since I was a kid and you were a glimmer in your father's eye. I mean, I remember literally as a kid, like in the 60s, reading about Cleveland Amory and Mary Tyler Moore and these people that were famous, and I knew who they were, working to get rid of the carriage horse trade in New York City. That was a lifetime and then some ago. And we still have horses pulling carriages in New York City. Tell us about that particular issue.
Sure. So I would say in 2005, the campaign to ban horse-drawn carriages, an organized campaign, began in earnest. Before then, much of the talk was about improving their conditions. The idea of a ban, it didn't even seem conceivable before 2005. But in 2005, a horse named Spotty was pulling a carriage down Ninth Avenue on a rainy winter night, and he spooked and he bolted with a carriage attached to his back and crashed into a car into an intersection on like West 52nd Street and Ninth Avenue. And that triggered a group of activists to come together and form the Coalition to Ban Horse-Drawn Carriages. And they got a city council member, Tony Avella, I think, to introduce the first bill to ban horse-drawn carriages. So that narrative about banning horse-drawn carriages really entered the mainstream media 20 years ago in 2005, and we've been fighting for that ban ever since. And there have been moments where we've really gotten close. In 2013, which is now, what, 12 years ago, Bill de Blasio, who ran for mayor, on a part of his platform was to ban horse-drawn carriages. And he spoke about it all the time, and he came to our events, and he said, this is going to be one of my top first orders of business. And we really thought that the end was near and that the public was on our side. And what happened is that he put it on the back burner. And a year later, by the time he was ready to focus on it, everyone had already turned against him and the issue. You had Liam Neeson became a spokesperson for the horse-drawn carriage trade. You had a powerful PR firm putting out stories about how this was nothing more than a real estate land grab by real estate developers who just wanted the stables, and this had nothing to do with the animals who were being treated humanely. And the public embraced this propaganda, which graced the pages of the New York Times, the New York Post. The Daily News was running front page stories all of the time in like 2013, 2014 about how vital the horse-drawn carriage industry was to the New York City economy. They said that the manure produced by the carriage horses was vital to the mushroom farming business in the suburbs. It was so over the top. But the public turned on the activist community. And all of a sudden, the support that we have vanished because of propaganda. Well, NICLAS, the group that's has been working now for, I don't know, 18 or so years, since 2008, to ban horse-drawn carriages, has made a lot of progress. And now polls show that about 70% of New Yorkers support a ban. And at the moment, there have been various obstacles throughout the years. At the moment, there's one obstacle standing in the way of a ban, and that is the president of the Transport Workers Union, the TWU, is a lobbyist for the horse-drawn carriage trade. The horse-drawn carriage drivers aren't unionized. They don't have collective bargaining or benefits. But the perception is they do, because the lobbyist for the horse-drawn carriage trade is this union boss. And he has basically told our lawmakers in New York City, if you support the legislation to ban horse-drawn carriages, it's called Rider's Law, after a horse who died on this, after being abused on the streets. But if you support Rider's Law, you will pay a political price for that. And so council members, while we had 20 or some odd council members who did sign on to Rider's Law, more said they were simply too afraid of the political price that they'd have to pay. So these horses have for years been a victim of political expediency. There is not a council member out there who doesn't know that horse-drawn carriages cannot be operated humanely or safely in the streets of New York. I mean, that ship has sailed. Everybody knows that they have no place in New York City and that horses shouldn't be living in warehouses in Midtown. But political expediency is the name of the game. People want to get reelected. They want it, to their current seats. They want higher office, and they don't want to alienate a union boss who endorses and who has the power of the union behind him. And so that's where we are now. Legislation will be reintroduced with the help of NICLAS in 2026, and we'll roll up our sleeves and we'll continue to work on this because we're not giving up on these horses. They have miserable lives. They've been stripped of everything that would make their lives worth living. And some listeners might not know, New York City doesn't have a pasture. where these horses can turn out. There's no place to graze. These are grazing animals. There's no place to roll or run, to stretch their legs, to interact physically with each other, which is what herd animals do. They've been stripped of everything. This has got to go, and we're going to continue this fight with the help of NICLAS.
And most recently, I think it wasn't even introduced, it wasn't even brought up to be voted on. Is that true?
So Ryder's Law, which is almost, people in the streets know what Ryder's Law is because that the video of Ryder being beaten in the street by a driver went viral several years ago. So what happened is that Ryder's Law was introduced and had about 26 or so co-sponsors. The problem was that the Speaker of the City Council, who controls the city's legislative agenda, assigned that bill to the City Council's Health Committee. And the Health Committee refused to allow not just a vote, not just to release the bill from committee to the floor of the council for a vote, but refused to even allow a public hearing. It's unheard of for an issue that has so much public support and that has the support of so many council members to refuse a public hearing for almost 3 years and to kill the bill before it could even get to the floor of the full city council for a vote. It was so undemocratic and just demonstrates sort of uh, how these sort of public servants are putting their political careers way ahead of public service.
Well, when you
Really
talk
frustrating.
about kowtowing to a union boss, it sounds like something historic. It sounds like Tammany Hall and the smoky back rooms. But no,
Yeah.
they've just taken out the smoke and everything else is still there.
You know, it's it's not really what people would think. Years ago there was a city council speaker who was notoriously authoritarian. It was her way or the highway. If you didn't vote the way she wanted you to vote, she would withhold discretionary funds from your district for senior centers or youth athletic leagues. So people had to vote the way she wanted them to vote, and she was horrible on animal issues. But she used to say, come to City Hall, come see democracy in action. And I thought, oh my God, you're an authoritarian masquerading as this democratic, you know, uh, this democratic leader. It was just so dirty. It's just so
Yeah.
yucky. You kind of
Wow.
need to take a shower after you leave these hearings where,
Right.
ugh,
And I realize that we're talking about a local New York City issue, but it's being mirrored around the country and around the world in many, many issues. Now, many cities, of course, have, I mean, around the world, eliminated the horse carriages for tourists. Do you have the names of some of those?
yeah, look, we know they're not Philadelphia had a big trade. They're not there anymore. Chicago, I think that they were banned. The city banned them. There are different reasons why they went away in each city. Paris used to have a commercial horse-drawn carriage trade. I think there's one now for hire, that you don't just see them march in the streets anymore. London used to have a commercial trade. Mumbai, where when I was in Mumbai, I don't know, 10 or so years ago, there were horse-drawn carriages in the tourist area. There aren't anymore. I mean, if all of these other and many, many other cities around the country, if all of these cities can do it, then New York can do it. And we're supposed to be leading in New York. We model ourselves or present ourselves as this progressive city at the, most progressive city in the country, but we've got this antiquated, barbaric, inhumane practice on the world stage. Central Park, 59th Street, literally every tourist who comes to New York goes there and they see it. And I'm sure many of them assume, well, it must be okay. It's right here in full public view. And that's why I made Blinders, the truth behind their tradition, which you can watch for free on YouTube so you can see the truth about what goes on behind the scenes. And sometimes right there in person when horses spook and bolt and crash.
It's so interesting that at a city level, national level, you can put forth one kind of image while you're doing something else. And I think that's true for us as individuals as well. And very often it is the animals who are left out and people that we admire, historical figures, current figures who are doing a lot of things that are laudable. They're just, they really do have the blinders on about animal issues. And with Veg Media Watch and everything else that you do, and your wonderful colleagues, and everybody that can call themselves an animal activist, can rest easy at night that even though we haven't gone nearly as far as we wish we had, we continue to make progress when we're popular and when we're not. So I know you have another engagement, some famous last words before we part.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all need to step out of our comfort zones, Victoria. The animals are relying on us to do more, to always do more than we're doing, to push for them. Because, one of the things I think about at night are, and this is going to sound so strange, but the images that are stuck in my head are that of mother pigs in gestation crates in factory farms chewing on the bars that are imprisoning their bodies, and that they're so small that they can't even turn around and lie down. And they're chewing on these bars and their mouths are bleeding. And when I think of that, I think, oh, I'm not doing enough. That's happening right now as you and I are enjoying each other's company on this podcast. We have to be doing more. And so that's my plea to everybody who's listening.
And we can all do more. Even just to take it up a notch. Everybody's busy. We're all called upon from so many sides. But if we can just remember every day, what have I done today for those who some people say we shouldn't say that they have no voice because they have all kinds of voices, but they don't have the language that can allow them to advocate for themselves. And so maybe we can say every day, what did I do today to advocate for them? And Donnie Moss, even though you may be staying up with those images in your head, you can answer that question affirmatively every single day. I have tremendous admiration for you. Tremendous. Thank
Likewise,
you.
thank you so much for
Uh,
having me, Victoria.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for being on this program. And thanks to everybody for listening. I just love you guys so much. So please be in touch. You can do that on the Facebook group, Main Street Vegan Podcast Listeners, or there is a contact form at mainstreetvegan.com. So tell me what you like less, who you'd like to have on, any questions, what you're interested in, because we are here to please. If it has anything to do with vitality, spirituality, or compassion, well, the Main Street Vegan Podcast is the place to find it. So thank you that you did. Now, let us go out and make Main Street vegan.